The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Anderson farm as Michael wiped his brow with a grease-stained rag. The ancient John Deere tractor had fought him all day, its mechanical stubbornness a perfect match for his own. At 45, Michael's calloused hands still remembered every curve and connection of the machine's engine knowledge earned from countless summer days spent alongside his grandfather. Knowledge that the construction company that laid him off 3 months ago had never fully appreciated. Emma sat perched on an overturned milk crate nearby her 10-year-old face, serious with concentration as she handed him tools. The grease smudge across her cheek matched his own, and not for the first time Michael saw her mother in the determined set of her jaw. 2 years since cancer had taken Sarah, and still these moments of recognition could steal his breath. The whirring sound of an expensive engine cut through the peaceful farm air. A glossy black SUV crunched down the gravel driveway, too clean and too new to belong in this landscape of weathered wood and rusted metal. Michael didn't need to see the license plate to know who had arrived. Victor Harrington's timing had always been impeccable, showing up whenever Michael felt most vulnerable. The bank notice had arrived yesterday. 60 days until foreclosure proceedings. The Anderson farm and his family, for 4 generations, reduced to a number on a spreadsheet, a delinquent account to be cleared. Michael had hidden the letter from Emma, but the weight of it pressed against him from inside his pocket. Victor stepped out of his vehicle, Italian loafers immediately gathering dust from the drive. His tailored suit and carefully styled silver hair marked him as something foreign to this land. The real estate developer had been circling the Anderson property for months, dropping by with increasingly lower offers as Michael's financial situation deteriorated. Emma's hand slipped into Michael's small fingers, squeezing his larger ones with surprising strength. He'd never told her about the foreclosure threat, but children always knew more than adults gave them credit for. The way Victor looked at their land, like it was already his, spoke volumes that even a 10-year-old could read. The conversation followed its usual pattern. Victor's rehearsed sympathy about Michael's situation. The reminder that Harrington Developments could solve all his problems with one signature. The thinly veiled references to the excellent schools in town, that Emma deserved to attend schools that required money Michael no longer had. The folded check that would remain uncashed, the amount lower than last month's offer. As Victor's SUV disappeared down the drive, Michael knelt beside the tractor, showing Emma how to check the oil. Her small hands mirrored his movements with surprising dexterity. The lessons had become more urgent lately, not just about tractors or carpentry or the hundreds of practical skills that had defined the Anderson men for generations. He was trying to give her everything before it could be taken away. The tractor finally sputtered to life, the ancient engine roaring in triumph. Emma's face lit up with accomplishment. That spark in her eyes was worth more than any amount Victor could write on his checks. It was the same spark Michael had seen in his own father's eyes and in his grandfather William's before that. The spark that said, "We build things, we fix what's broken, we endure." For a moment, Michael could almost believe they would find a way through this. Almost. The shadows had grown longer by the time they put away the tools. Emma's attention drifted toward the far corner of the barn, where an old hay wagon sat nearly forgotten under decades of accumulated tools and farm debris. His grandfather William's wagon, once the heart of the farm's operations, now a relic from a different era. Emma tugged at his sleeve, curiosity brightening her eyes. Just a quick look, they agreed. Just to see what might be salvageable. After all, Michael's carpentry skills could transform the old wood into something new, perhaps small items to sell at the farmer's market. Every dollar counted now. The wagon groaned under their touch, decades of dust rising in the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the barn's high windows. The wooden sides had turned silver gray with age, but the craftsmanship remained evident beneath years of neglect. His grandfather had maintained it meticulously, once the wagon representing the transition between horse-drawn farming and the mechanized future that would follow. Michael ran his hand along the side panel, recognizing the joinery techniques he'd learned in his own apprenticeship. Mortise and tenon connections, hand-cut dovetails at the corners, wooden pegs instead of nails where possible. The wagon bed itself was solid oak built to withstand decades of use. A far cry from the mass-produced disposable world they now lived in. Emma climbed up onto the wagon bed, her sneakers making hollow sounds against the weathered planks. The wood creaked but held firm. Together, they began shifting through the accumulated debris, rusted chains, bent metal hooks, mysterious implements whose purposes had been lost to time. Michael explained each identifiable tool, telling Emma about how farming had changed, how men like his grandfather had adapted with each new innovation. His fingers found a leather harness buried beneath a coil of rope, the material still supple in places despite its age. He held it up for Emma to see, describing how the draft horses would have worn it, how different farming was when every acre represented hours of physical labor, rather than minutes in an air-conditioned tractor cab. Emma listened with unusual attention, asking questions that revealed her sharp mind. This connection to the past seemed to fascinate her more than the tablet games that usually captured her interest. Michael realized he had been so focused on their uncertain future that he'd neglected to share their past. There were stories in every corner of this farm, stories that might soon belong to Victor Harrington and whatever luxury development he envisioned for this land. The thought renewed his determination to save something from the inevitable. If the farm itself couldn't be preserved, perhaps its legacy could be. The practical knowledge, the values of self-reliance and craftsmanship that had defined the Anderson men for generations, these he could pass to Emma regardless of where they lived. They continued clearing the wagon bed, working in companionable silence as the light began to fade. Emma's methodical approach surprised him. She didn't just toss things aside, but organized them into piles of metal in one corner, leather goods in another, wooden implements in a third. An innate sense of order that reminded Michael of his grandfather. The sun had nearly set when Emma's movements stopped suddenly. She knelt near the front of the wagon bed, her small hands pressing against one of the floorboards. Michael watched as she moved to another board, then back to the first, her head tilted in concentration. Emma's voice carried a hint of excitement. "This one sounds different, like it's hollow underneath." Michael moved closer, kneeling beside her on the rough planks. Emma was right, there was something different about this particular board. He pressed his palm against it, then rapped his knuckles against the wood. The sound that returned was indeed different from the surrounding boards, lighter, with an echo that suggested empty space beneath. Years of working with wood had taught Michael to recognize the secrets old structures often held. Hidden compartments weren't uncommon in antiques, especially those built during Prohibition or earlier periods when people had reasons to conceal valuables. But his grandfather's wagon dated to the early 1950s, long after such hiding places had fallen out of common use. Michael retrieved his flashlight from his tool belt, examining the edges of the board more carefully. To the untrained eye, it looked identical to those surrounding it, but Michael noticed the nearly invisible seam slightly wider on one end. Using his pocket knife, he carefully probed the wider gap, feeling for the release mechanism such compartments typically contained. Emma watched with wide eyes as the blade found purchase in the seam. A soft click, barely audible, and the board loosened. Michael carefully lifted it away, revealing a shallow cavity beneath. The space wasn't large, perhaps 8 inches wide by 12 long, and only 4 inches deep, but it had been crafted with remarkable precision. The interior was lined with faded velvet, now dusty with age, but once elegant. Nestled within this hidden compartment sat a wooden box, smaller than a bread box, but larger than a typical jewelry case. The wood was rich walnut, polished to a warm glow that had somehow survived decades in darkness. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, far beyond utilitarian farm work. The lid featured intricate carving wheat sheaves intertwined with delicate wildlife motifs, rabbits, foxes, and birds rendered with remarkable detail. Michael lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. This was no ordinary farm relic. This was an artisan's masterpiece, the kind of object typically found in a wealthy home rather than a working farm. Emma leaned closer, her breath catching as Michael turned the box to examine it fully. There was no lock, just a simple brass clasp that had turned green with age. The moment felt strangely significant. This hidden treasure had waited patiently for decades, through storms and seasons, through births and deaths, through the rise and fall of the Anderson farm's fortunes. It had been placed here deliberately concealed from casual discovery. Whatever it contained had mattered enough to someone, presumably his grandfather, to warrant such secrecy. Michael hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Some secrets perhaps deserved to remain buried. But Emma's expectant face decided him. Together they would face whatever history this box contained. The brass clasp resisted briefly, then gave way with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet barn. Michael lifted the lid slowly, Emma pressed against his side in anticipation. The box's interior was lined with the same faded velvet as the hidden compartment. Nestled within were several objects: a tarnished silver pocket watch, a small leather-bound journal, a stack of yellowed photographs, and a thick envelope addressed to William Anderson in elegant handwriting. Beneath these items lay a carefully folded map, hand-drawn on what appeared to be architectural paper, and a brass key, unlike any Michael had seen before, ornate, in design with an unusual tooth pattern. Emma reached for the photographs first, but Michael gently intercepted her hand. These items deserved careful handling and deliberate examination. The pocket watch drew his attention, a beautiful piece despite its tarnished condition, with intricate engravings on its silver case. When opened, the face revealed Roman numerals and hands frozen at 347. Inside the case was an inscription: "To my dearest William with all my love, CJ 1952. CJ, the initials, sparked no immediate recognition. Michael's grandmother had been Sarah Thompson before marrying William Anderson. His grandfather's mother was Elizabeth Anderson, née Miller. Who was CJ, and why had his grandfather kept a watch from this person hidden away in a secret compartment? Emma had already moved on to the small leather journal. Its cover was worn smooth with handling, suggesting it had been opened many times before being placed in this box. The first page bore an inscription in the same elegant handwriting that addressed the envelope: "For William. May you always remember the summer that changed everything. With eternal love, Catherine James." Below was a date: June 15, 1952. Catherine James, CJ, the same person who had given his grandfather the pocket watch. But who was she? William had married Michael's grandmother Sarah in 1954. This journal and watch dated to 2 years earlier. Michael set the journal aside, turning his attention to the photographs. The images were black and white, carefully preserved despite their age. The first photograph showed his grandfather as a young man, perhaps 22 or 23. But it wasn't the William Anderson that appeared in family albums, not the serious, responsible farmer with carefully composed expressions. This William was different, relaxed, genuinely happy, in a way that seemed unfamiliar. He sat on what appeared to be the farmhouse porch, though it looked different then, with more trees surrounding it. Beside him sat a beautiful young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. She wore a simple summer dress, and both looked directly at the camera with expressions of unguarded joy. The back of the photograph bore a simple notation: "William and Catherine, July 1952. The subsequent photographs told the story of their summer together. Catherine helping with farm work, dress hem muddy but smile radiant. Another showed them at what appeared to be the county fair sharing cotton candy. In one particularly striking image, they stood by the old oak tree that still dominated the south field, and Michael could make out carved initials in the bark behind them. The final photograph in the stack was different. It showed Catherine alone, standing beside a train, a single suitcase at her feet. She looked back over her shoulder at the camera, her expression a complex mixture of longing, regret, and resignation. On the back, someone had written simply, "Goodbye." The thick envelope came next. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he carefully opened the flap, mindful that he was handling something that had remained sealed for over 70 years. The envelope contained several items. First was a letter written on what had once been high-quality stationery, now yellowed with age. It was addressed to William and dated September 15, 1952, just months after the photographs had been taken. The letter's elegant handwriting matched the journal inscription. Catherine James had been visiting relatives in the county for the summer, a city girl taking a break from her life in Boston. She had met William at a community gathering, and what began as casual friendship had quickly developed into something deeper. But Catherine's family had expectations. An engagement to Richard Blackwood III, son of a prominent Boston businessman, had already been arranged, a marriage meant to secure the James family's social standing. Her summer romance with a farmer's wife was viewed as nothing more than a temporary diversion. "I know you'll think me a coward for leaving without a proper goodbye," she wrote. "But I couldn't bear to see the hurt in your eyes, couldn't trust myself not to abandon everything for one more day with you. My family has made their expectations clear, and I have obligations I cannot ignore, no matter how my heart rebels against them." The letter explained that she was enclosing something else, a newspaper clipping from the Boston Herald Society pages announcing her engagement to Richard Blackwood III. But there were more letters in the envelope, suggesting the story continued beyond that announcement. The remaining papers revealed a narrative of both heartbreaking and inspiring. Several more letters from Catherine spanned nearly 2 years, each revealing more about the path her life had taken after leaving the Anderson farm. The first few letters, written in late 1952 and early 1953, chronicled her struggle to adapt to life as the fiancée of a wealthy man she clearly didn't love. She wrote about elaborate parties where she felt like an actress playing a role, about wedding plans that felt more like business arrangements than celebrations. "Richard is kind enough," one letter noted, "but he speaks to me as if I'm a beautiful object he's acquired for his collection. He doesn't know about the girl who spent a summer learning to drive a tractor, who helped bring in a harvest, who discovered her hands were capable of real work." But the tone of the letters began to shift in spring 1953. Catherine wrote about growing doubts, about realizing she couldn't proceed with a marriage that felt like a business transaction. Then came the most surprising revelation in a letter dated June 1953. "I've broken the engagement, William. I couldn't go through with it. The scandal has been tremendous. My family is furious. Richard's family is threatening legal action, and Boston society is buzzing with gossip about the James girl who threw away the catch of the season. But for the first time since leaving your farm, I can breathe again." Catherine had written that she was planning to return to the area, hoping to rebuild what she had abandoned. But then the letter stopped abruptly. The final one was dated August 15, 1953. "Something has happened that changes everything. I may not be able to return as planned. Please know that my feelings for you have never wavered, even when my courage did. Whatever comes next, the summer we shared remains the truest part of my life." After that silence, Emma had been unusually quiet through this discovery, sensing the gravity of what they'd found. Now she reached for the folded map that had lain beneath the other items. It was drawn on drafting paper showing the boundaries of the Anderson farm as it existed in the 1950s. Various areas were marked with notations in Catherine's elegant handwriting, observations about soil conditions, water drainage patterns, crop rotation possibilities. This wasn't a treasure map in the conventional sense, but a detailed agricultural analysis. In one corner, however, the old oak tree was clearly marked with a small X and the notation, "Our place, August 10th, 1952. The brass key had been taped to this corner of the map, a small note beside it reading simply, "For safekeeping." Michael carefully returned the items to the wooden box, mind racing with questions. What had happened to Catherine James? Why had his grandfather never mentioned her? And most importantly, why had he kept these mementos hidden away rather than destroying them? The fading light reminded Michael how late it had grown. Emma's stomach growled audibly, breaking the spell of their discovery. Dinner needed to be made, homework completed, normal life resumed despite the extraordinary window into the past they'd just opened. Michael promised Emma they would examine everything more carefully tomorrow. The box and its secrets had waited 70 years. It could wait one more night. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Michael spread the contents of the box across the kitchen table. The quiet house allowed him to focus more intently on each item, searching for clues to the full story. The journal drew his attention, first Catherine's personal record of that transformative summer. The entries were brief but evocative, painting a vivid picture of a summer romance that had clearly meant the world to both participants. She wrote about long walks through wheat fields, conversations that lasted until dawn, and dreams of a future that apparently never materialized. "William took me to see the old oak tree today," one entry read. "He says it's been standing for over 100 years. He carved our initials in the bark right next to where his grandfather had carved his own name decades ago." There's something powerful about that continuity, that sense of belonging to the land and its history. What struck Michael most was Catherine's detailed observations about farming practices. Far from being merely a city girl fascinated by rural life, she demonstrated considerable knowledge about agricultural science. Her entries included sophisticated discussions of soil composition, irrigation methods, and crop rotation strategies, topics that would have been unusual for anyone in the early 1950s, let alone a young woman from Boston society. One particular entry caught his attention. "Showed William my ideas for contour plowing on the North Field today. He was skeptical at first, said his father and grandfather had always plowed straight furrows regardless of the hill's slope, but he agreed to try a small section my way. The rainfall last night proved my point, significantly less erosion on our test section. William admitted I might be onto something. He's always willing to learn to question the way things have always been done. That's rare in a farmer. Michael set down the journal, though a new understanding dawning. His grandfather had been known in the community as an innovator, one of the first local farmers to adopt conservation techniques like contour plowing, crop rotation, and strategic windbreak plantings. These methods had preserved the Anderson farm's soil quality while neighboring properties suffered from erosion and depletion. William had always credited agricultural extension bulletins for these ideas. Had they actually originated with Catherine? The map further supported this theory. It wasn't merely sentimental, it was a detailed agricultural management plan for the Anderson farm with specific recommendations for each field and slope. Notes about seasonal water flow soil types in microclimate zones demonstrated a scientific approach to farming decades ahead of its time. Michael found himself increasingly curious about Catherine James. If she had been visiting from Boston, if she had been part of society, there would be some record of her. The internet made it possible to search historical records in ways previous generations couldn't have imagined. A quick search confirmed that Catherine James had indeed been part of Boston's social scene in the early 1950s. Several mentions appeared in digitized society pages, always described as the accomplished daughter of industrialist Howard James. The announcement of her engagement to Richard Blackwood III had been a major social event in February 1952, just months before her summer visit to farm country. Just as Catherine had described in her letters, Michael found a small notice dated June 20th, 1953. The engagement of Miss Catherine James to Mr. Richard Blackwood III has been terminated by mutual consent. After that, mentions of Catherine in society pages disappeared. What Michael found next stopped him cold. A death certificate filed in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, dated September 3, 1953, just weeks after her last letter to William. Catherine Elizabeth James had died at age 22, barely a month before what would have been her wedding date. The cause was listed as complications from pneumonia, but something about the sparse details raised questions in Michael's mind. Searching through newspaper archives, he found only a brief death notice in the Boston Herald, a few lines mentioning that Catherine James had died unexpectedly after a brief illness. There was no mention of the broken engagement, no details about her final weeks. But Michael also discovered something else, a small news item about a young woman found unconscious in Boston Common, apparently having collapsed while walking alone in the evening. The woman had been taken to a hospital, but died several days later from complications. The article didn't mention the woman's name, but the timing aligned perfectly with Catherine's death. The more Michael researched, the more he realized that Catherine's final months had likely been far more difficult than her letters revealed. She had sacrificed her social standing, defied her family, and broken a socially advantageous engagement, all extraordinary acts for a young woman in the early 1950s. In probate records, Michael discovered something shocking. Catherine had left a will that included a bequest to William Anderson. I leave my father's pocket watch and personal papers to be delivered only if he is unmarried at the time of my death. The wooden box and its contents had been her final gift to his grandfather. Michael leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. By the time the box reached William, Catherine was gone, and he was free to build a life with someone else. Yet he couldn't bring himself to destroy these mementos. They represented not just a lost love, but apparently the source of the agricultural innovations that had sustained the Anderson farm for generations. The thought brought Michael back to his current predicament. The bank notice seemed to weigh even heavier in his pocket now. 4 generations of Andersons had worked this land, had built something that endured. His grandfather had preserved it through the agricultural knowledge gained from Catherine. Now it would be lost under Victor Harrington's luxury development. Michael was still pondering this bitter irony when his phone chimed with an email notification. Expecting another automated reminder from the bank, he was surprised to see a message from Martha Wilson, the 75-year-old retired librarian who lived on the neighboring property. Martha had been the county librarian for nearly 40 years before retiring and knew more about local history than anyone else in the area. The message was brief. Michael heard through the grapevine that Victor's been pressuring you again. Before you make any decisions, I have information about your grandfather and the farm that might interest you. Stop by tomorrow if you can. Martha. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Had Martha somehow known about Catherine James, about the hidden box, she would have been a young woman herself in the early 1950s, possibly acquainted with both William and Catherine. For the first time since receiving the foreclosure notice, Michael felt a flicker of hope, or at least curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. Emma's voice startled him from these thoughts. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, apparently awakened by his research. Her eyes went immediately to the items spread across the table, particularly the photographs. She asked if Catherine was their relative, and Michael had to explain that no, Catherine was someone his grandfather had known before meeting his grandmother. Someone important enough that he'd kept these memories hidden away all his life. Emma absorbed this with the directness only children possess. "So we have a mystery to solve," she concluded. Her use of "we" warmed something in Michael's chest. This unexpected connection to the past had created a new bond between them, a shared purpose beyond just surviving day to day. As Michael tucked Emma back into bed, her questions continued. What happened to Catherine? Why did Grandpa William hide the box? What was the key for Michael promised they would work to find answers together, that sometimes the past held solutions for the present? Emma seemed satisfied with this, though her final question before drifting off lingered with Michael. Do you think Catherine would be sad that we might lose the farm? Sleep proved elusive for Michael that night. His mind kept returning to the agricultural innovations detailed in Catherine's journal and map techniques that had preserved the Anderson farm through drought and economic downturns when neighboring properties failed. There was something there, some value beyond the sentimental, if he could only piece it together. The morning brought another visit from Victor Harrington, earlier than usual, and with renewed determination. This time he arrived with what he called his final offer, still insultingly below market value but higher than his previous attempts. He also brought architectural renderings of Harrington Estates, the luxury development he envisioned for the Anderson property. The plans showed the farmhouse demolish the ancient oak tree, remove the fields carved into uniform lots for McMansions with pretentious names like the Belvedere and the Wellington. A small park in the center was labeled Heritage Green, the only acknowledgement that this land had any history at all. Victor's smile never reached his eyes as he explained the time-limited nature of his offer. Accept within 48 hours, or he would simply wait for the bank foreclosure and likely acquire the property for even less. His confidence made it clear he believed Michael had no alternatives. What Victor couldn't know, was how the previous night's discovery had shifted something fundamental in Michael's perspective. The Anderson farm wasn't just his home or even his heritage. It was the physical embodiment of a remarkable collaboration between his grandfather and Catherine James, a testament to innovation, adaptation, and resilience across generations. As Victor's SUV pulled away, Emma joined Michael on the porch, her small hand slipping into his. The determination in her eyes matched his own growing resolve. They had a mystery to solve, yes, but more importantly, they had a legacy to preserve. The visit to Martha Wilson's home that afternoon proved even more enlightening than Michael had hoped. The retired librarian welcomed them with lemonade and the kind of direct approach that had made her both respected and slightly feared during her decades managing the county's information resources. Martha had indeed known both William and Catherine. At 19, she had worked part-time at the library the summer Catherine spent in the county. The two young women had formed a friendship based on their shared love of books and Catherine's unusual interest in agricultural science. Martha confirmed what Michael had begun to suspect from the journal, and map Catherine hadn't been merely a city girl playing at farm life. She had been a serious student of agricultural science at a time when women were actively discouraged from such pursuits. Her summer vacation had actually been a self-designed field study, combining her academic knowledge with practical experience. According to Martha, William and Catherine's relationship had been the talk of the county that summer, not just because of their obvious devotion to each other, but because of how they challenged conventional thinking about farming practices. William had been open to Catherine's scientific approach in ways many established farmers found threatening. Martha's revelation about Catherine's academic background sent Michael back to his online research that evening. Digging deeper into educational records, he discovered Catherine had indeed been studying at the Massachusetts Agricultural College, now the University of Massachusetts, one of the few women in the program. Her academic records showed exceptional promise. She had been pursuing research on sustainable farming practices decades before such concepts became mainstream. This discovery cast the contents of the wooden box in an entirely new light. The journal, the map, the detailed notes weren't merely romantic mementos. They were valuable scientific observations, the work of a brilliant mind cut short by tragedy. Catherine's innovations, implemented by William and passed down through generations, had quite literally saved the Anderson farm while neighboring properties failed. As Michael continued his research into the night, another discovery sent a chill through him. Richard Blackwood III, Catherine's former fiancé, hadn't remained a jilted society bachelor for long. He had married another socially prominent woman within months of Catherine's death and gone on to found Blackwood Agrochemical, one of the largest agricultural chemical companies in the country during the 1960s and 70s. The company had made millions promoting chemical-intensive farming methods that stood in direct opposition to the sustainable approaches Catherine had advocated. Even more disturbing, one of Blackwood Agrochemical's early investors and board members had been none other than Howard Harrington Victor's father. The connection seemed too significant to be coincidental, especially given Victor's determined efforts to acquire the Anderson farm. Was there something more to this property than just its development potential? Something connected to Catherine James and her innovative approach to agriculture? Michael was still pondering these questions the next morning when Emma made her own discovery. While examining the ornate brass key from the box, she noticed it matched the unusual keyhole in a roll-top desk that had sat in the farmhouse living room for as long as Michael could remember. The desk had been William's, passed down to Michael's father and then to him, though none of them had ever found a key that fit its locked central drawer. The key slid into the lock with the satisfying precision of perfect craftsmanship. The drawer opened smoothly despite decades of disuse, revealing another journal, this one in William's handwriting, along with carefully preserved seed packets labeled in Catherine's elegant script: drought-resistant wheat variation, erosion control grass blend, high-yield corn hybrid. William's journal documented his systematic implementation of Catherine's agricultural theories after her death, recording successes, failures, and modifications over decades. What had begun as a tribute to a lost love had evolved into a lifelong scientific endeavor. The Anderson farm had essentially been a 70-year agricultural experiment based on Catherine James's visionary approach to sustainable farming. The implications were staggering. The seed varieties Catherine had developed, apparently through careful selection and crossbreeding, represented potentially valuable intellectual property in an era increasingly concerned with climate-resilient agriculture. The detailed records William had kept, combined with the proven success of these methods over 7 decades, could be worth far more than the land itself as real estate. As Michael processed this revelation, Emma pointed out something he had overlooked, a notation in William's journal referring to Catherine's complete research notes secured as she requested. If the journals and maps they had already found represented only part of her research, where was the rest? What had William meant by secured? The answer, Michael realized, might lie with the map and the marked oak tree. The brass key had been attached to that specific location on the map. Perhaps it opened more than just the desk drawer. Perhaps Catherine had left something else hidden, something William had protected all these years. The old oak tree stood majestically in the south field, its massive trunk and spreading branches visible from nearly every point on the farm. Generations of Andersons had carved their initials into its bark, a living record of the family's connection to this land. As Michael and Emma approached it now, the morning sun illuminated the weathered carvings, including the faded WA plus CJ 1952, still visible after all these years. The old oak's bark felt warm beneath Michael's palm, decades of summer suns absorbed into its weathered surface. He traced the carved initials with his fingertips, the indentations shallow but still distinct after 70 years. William and Catherine's declaration of love had outlasted them both, preserved in living wood that continued to grow and strengthen despite all that had changed around it. Emma circled the massive trunk, her keen eyes searching for anything unusual. The tree's lower section bore the markings of generations, initials, dates, crude hearts etched by pocket knives wielded by Anderson hands. Higher up, the bark remained untouched, too elevated for even the tallest family members to reach without assistance. Nothing about the tree immediately suggested a hiding place. No obvious hollow, no metal plate concealed beneath moss, no suspicious patch of newer bark. If William had hidden something here, and as the map suggested, he had done so with characteristic thoroughness and subtlety. Michael studied Catherine's map again, looking for additional clues. The X marking the oak tree included a small notation he hadn't noticed before: 3 paces north, eye-level dawn shadow. The cryptic instruction made little sense until Emma pointed eastward, where the rising sun was still relatively low in the morning sky. The oak tree cast a distinct shadow across the ground, stretching northward exactly as it would have at dawn. Following this shadow and walking 3 paces from the trunk, Michael found himself facing a particular section of the bark that appeared unremarkable, except for a small, almost imperceptible indentation that matched the unusual tooth pattern of the brass key. The discovery sent a ripple of excitement through Michael. The indentation wasn't natural, it had been carefully carved, then weathered by decades of exposure, until it became nearly invisible to casual observation. Only someone specifically looking for it, with knowledge of its existence and location, would ever notice it. The brass key slid into the indentation with surprising ease. A gentle turn produced a satisfying click, and a section of bark approximately 8 inches square pivoted outward like a tiny door, revealing a metal box embedded within the trunk itself. The tree had grown around the container, incorporating it so completely that it appeared to be part of the natural structure. Extracting the box required careful maneuvering. The metal container had been designed to fit precisely within the cavity, with barely enough clearance to slide it out. Decades of the tree's growth had only tightened this fit. When Michael finally worked it free, he found himself holding a small, steel strongbox, roughly the size of a hardcover book, its surface etched with the same wheat and wildlife motifs as the wooden box from the hay wagon. Emma bounced on her toes with barely contained excitement. This discovery exceeded every childhood treasure hunt fantasy: a secret compartment in an ancient tree, a hidden box, the promise of answers to a mystery spanning generations. The mundane concerns of foreclosure notices and Victor Harrington's threats seemed temporarily distant. The strongbox had no visible keyhole, presenting yet another puzzle. Michael examined every surface, seeking some mechanism or opening. Emma's suggestion came with the certainty only children can muster. Maybe the desk key works on this too. Different lock, same key. The brass key appeared far too ornate for the utilitarian strongbox, but Michael humored her theory. Careful inspection revealed a small, cleverly disguised keyhole beneath one of the etched wheat stalks, easily overlooked unless specifically sought. The brass key slid in smoothly, and with a crisp click, the box opened. Inside lay a leather-bound research journal, significantly thicker than the one they'd found in the wooden box, its pages dense with Catherine's elegant handwriting, technical diagrams, and pressed plant specimens. Accompanying the journal were several sealed envelopes, each labeled in careful script, in a small velvet pouch containing what appeared to be seed samples, each in its own labeled glass vial. The journal's opening page bore an inscription that sent a chill through Michael. My complete agricultural research findings. Should anything happen to me, please deliver to Dr. Eleanor Marshall at Massachusetts Agricultural College. If this is impossible, protect this work from those who would exploit it for profit rather than sustainability. With eternal love and scientific optimism, Catherine James. The date beneath the inscription, August 28, 1953, was just days before her death. Michael carefully rewrapped the journal and other items, securing them in his backpack. This discovery required proper examination under controlled conditions, not hurried review in an open field where wind or an unexpected rain shower might damage fragile documents. More importantly, the serious tone of Catherine's inscription suggested these materials might hold significant value, possibly the key to saving the Anderson farm. The walk back to the farmhouse took on a surreal quality, each familiar landmark suddenly imbued with new significance. The fields Michael had known his entire life had been shaped by Catherine's scientific approach and William's faithful implementation of her theories. The farm wasn't merely land and buildings, it was the physical manifestation of their collaborative vision, a living testament to what they had created together despite being separated by tragedy. Emma skipped ahead, stopping occasionally to examine plants or soil with newfound interest, seeing the farm through different eyes after their discoveries. Her innocent excitement provided a counterbalance to the weight of responsibility settling on Michael's shoulders. Whatever Catherine's research contained, it had been important enough to hide securely, important enough for William to protect for decades. Martha Wilson's porch light was already on when they arrived at her cottage that evening, as if she'd been expecting them. The retired librarian had spent the day digging through her personal archives boxes of local history materials she'd accumulated during her 40 years managing the county's information resources. Materials too personal or speculative for the official library collection, but too valuable to discard. Martha's sitting room had been transformed into an impromptu research center with folders, photographs, and newspaper clippings arranged in careful chronological order across every surface. Her organizational skills remained sharp despite retirement, each item precisely labeled and cross-referenced. The documents she'd assembled told a more complete story of Catherine James's time in the county and her relationship with William. Local newspaper social columns had noted her arrival to stay with distant relatives for the summer of 1952, describing her as a Boston society daughter taking a rustic holiday. Subsequent mentions documented her appearances at community events initially as an exotic curiosity from the city, later as William Anderson's constant companion. Martha had preserved something even more valuable, her own diary from that period. As a young woman working at the library, she had developed a friendship with Catherine, bonding over their shared love of books and learning. The diary entries painted an intimate portrait of Catherine that went far beyond newspaper accounts or even the personal journals they discovered. According to Martha's observations, Catherine had been brilliant, passionate about agricultural science at a time when women were actively discouraged from such interests. Her summer vacation had been a self-designed research opportunity, combining academic theories with practical field testing. William had been the rare farmer willing to consider her ideas without dismissing them due to her gender or urban background. Martha's diary also revealed something the official records omitted: Catherine's growing fear in the weeks before her departure. Several entries mention Catherine's concern about her research about certain powerful interests who might misuse her findings if they fell into the wrong hands. The final entry regarding Catherine, dated August 20th, 1952, noted, "CJ left today. She seemed frightened beneath her composed exterior. Said something troubling about her fiancé's father being too interested in her research for the wrong reasons." This cryptic note aligned with what Michael had discovered about Richard Blackwood III and his family's subsequent agricultural chemical empire. Catherine's sustainable farming approaches would have represented a threat to those investing in chemical-intensive agricultural methods. Her research, if widely implemented, might have changed the trajectory of American farming away from the chemical dependencies that generated billions in profit during the latter half of the 20th century. Martha confirmed this suspicion with additional information she'd gathered over decades. After Catherine's death, Blackwood Agrochemical had rapidly expanded, securing patents on various agricultural chemicals, many targeting the same issues Catherine had addressed through natural methods. The company's early board had included Howard Harrington, Victor's father, whose wealth had largely derived from this agricultural chemical business. The connection between Catherine's research, her untimely death, and the Harrington family's persistent interest in acquiring the Anderson farm suddenly seemed far from coincidental. Martha's theory, developed over decades of quiet observation and research, suggested a deliberate suppression of Catherine's sustainable agriculture methods to clear the path for chemical alternatives. As if summoned by their discussion, headlights swept across Martha's front windows, a vehicle turning into her driveway. Michael's stomach tightened at the sight of Victor Harrington's now familiar black SUV. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Somehow Victor had learned of their visit to Martha. Victor's demeanor had shifted from his usual practiced charm to barely concealed impatience. His explanation for the unexpected visit, just passing by and noticed Michael's truck, rang hollow given the isolated location of Martha's cottage. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the arranged documents with obvious interest, lingering on the backpack where Michael had stored Catherine's research materials. The conversation that followed maintained a veneer of civility stretched thin over mutual suspicion. Victor inquired about their local history project with affected casualness that fooled no one. His questions probed for specific information about what they might have discovered, while Martha deflected with the skill of someone who had protected sensitive information throughout her professional career. Victor's departure left a charged atmosphere in his wake. Martha's expression had grown grave, her earlier academic interest in the historical mystery replaced by urgent concern. The situation had escalated from historical curiosity to something with present-day implications. Victor's unusual interest confirmed their discoveries held significant value and potential danger. Martha's advice came with the direct practicality that had defined her approach to life. Document everything immediately. Create multiple copies. Secure the originals. Trust no one outside their immediate circle. Decades of managing sensitive community information had taught her that knowledge became vulnerable the moment others realized its value. That night, Michael carefully photographed every page of Catherine's research journal and the accompanying documents, uploading the images to secured cloud storage with encryption Martha had helped him configure. The physical materials were sealed in waterproof containers and hidden in different locations around the farm. The original strongbox returned to the oak tree, and additional materials concealed within the hay wagon's secret compartment, and the most critical documents stored in a fireproof safe beneath the floorboards of Michael's workshop. Emma's observation cut through the tension of these security measures. If Catherine was so smart about farming, wouldn't her ideas be in books by now? Why hide something if it's already known? The question crystallized something Michael had been considering. The true value of Catherine's research might not lie in general agricultural principles, which indeed had eventually become more mainstream, but in specific applications unique to the Anderson farm itself. The seed varieties she had developed, the detailed microclimate analysis of their specific fields, the customized crop rotation schedules optimized for their particular soil conditions, these represented intellectual property potentially worth far more than the land's real estate value. Morning brought unwelcome discovery. The farm's perimeter showed signs of nighttime visitors, footprints in the soft earth near the oak tree, a damaged section of fence near the northern property line, a workshop window left slightly ajar, though Michael distinctly remembered securing it. Nothing appeared to be missing, but the intrusion left no doubt that others were actively searching for what they had found. Emma's frightened voice called from the barn. She had gone to check on her pet rabbits and discovered the hay wagon had been disturbed, tools and debris scattered, as if someone had searched through it hastily. The secret compartment remained undiscovered, its clever design having confused the intruders, but the violation of their space left Emma shaken. Michael's call to the sheriff's office brought minimal response. A deputy drove by, took notes about the apparent trespassing, but offered little beyond a promise to keep an eye out during regular patrols. The understaffed rural department had limited resources for what they classified as minor property infractions without theft. The intrusion accelerated Michael's timeline. Whatever value Catherine's research held, others were already pursuing it with concerning determination. Understanding and leveraging that value might represent the only path to saving the farm from foreclosure and Victor's development plans. The next logical investigative step led to the county records office, where property deeds, agricultural reports, and historical land surveys were maintained. Michael needed to understand exactly how William had implemented Catherine's theories over time, how the Anderson farm had evolved under their combined influence. The records clerk's reaction to Michael's request for his grandfather's agricultural filings raised the first red flag. The older documents should have been stored in the basement archives, yet the clerk reported the specific records had been removed just days earlier by someone claiming to represent the Historical Society. The timing aligned precisely with their discovery of the wooden box in the hay wagon. Fortunately, Martha's foresight had anticipated such obstacles. The retired librarian had maintained her own unofficial archive of county agricultural records, copies made during her tenure when she recognized the historical significance of William Anderson's farming approaches. These documents, combined with Catherine's research journal, began to reveal the true scope of their collaborative achievement. Catherine had developed sustainable farming methods decades ahead of their time approaches that modern regenerative agriculture was only now rediscovering. But her most valuable contribution appeared to be specialized crop varieties developed through careful selection and crossbreeding plants optimized for resilience, yield, and sustainability without chemical dependencies. Williams' implementation records showed consistent success with these varieties across decades through droughts, floods, and pest pressures that devastated neighboring farms. The Anderson farm had remained productive when others failed, its soil actually improving in quality over generations rather than becoming depleted. Modern agricultural companies paid millions for such proven varieties, especially those demonstrating climate resilience. The intellectual property represented by Catherine's seed stock and development methods could potentially be worth far more than the land itself. If properly documented and verified, these agricultural innovations might save the farm in ways Victor Harrington hadn't anticipated. The university's Agricultural Extension Office provided the next crucial resource. The young agent's initial skepticism about rediscovered heirloom varieties vanished when Michael produced Catherine's detailed documentation and William's 70 years of implementation data. What had begun as a courtesy meeting with a struggling farmer quickly transformed into intense scientific interest. The agent's preliminary testing of soil samples from the Anderson farm confirmed the extraordinary results of Catherine's methods: microbial diversity, carbon sequestration, and overall soil health measures that exceeded typical organic farms by significant margins. Even more promising, the seed samples Catherine had preserved showed genetic traits modern agricultural researchers were actively seeking for climate adaptation. The university could help authenticate and potentially commercialize these discoveries, the agent explained, but the process would require time, months at minimum, possibly years, for full validation and patent applications. The foreclosure deadline loomed just weeks away, creating a critical gap between the potential value of their discovery and the immediate financial pressure threatening the farm. Michael's return to the farmhouse that evening brought unwelcome news. Emma, her voice tight with worry, reported a black SUV had slowly circled the property twice while he was gone. Later, a different vehicle had parked briefly at the end of their driveway, a man in business attire taking photographs with a telephoto lens before departing when she became visible. The surveillance escalated their situation from academic mystery to immediate threat. Martha's warnings about protecting the research gained new urgency. Michael instructed Emma to pack an overnight bag. They would stay with Martha temporarily while determining their next steps. The research materials were too valuable to leave unprotected in the increasingly vulnerable farmhouse. As they prepared to leave, a distinctive crunching sound on the gravel driveway announced another visitor. Michael's tension eased slightly at the sight of Martha's sensible sedan rather than Victor's luxury SUV. The retired librarian's unexpected arrival came with disturbing information. She had received a phone call from a Boston law firm representing interested parties, seeking any information she might have about Catherine James or William Anderson. The caller had offered a substantial research stipend for her cooperation. Martha's refusal had been immediate and unequivocal, but the approach confirmed their discoveries had attracted serious attention from well-resourced parties. Her suggestion that they temporarily relocate the most critical materials to her cottage's concealed safe room, a Cold War-era fallout shelter the previous owner had installed, offered their best immediate security option. The night passed in restless vigilance, Martha maintaining her position by the window overlooking the driveway, while Michael secured the research materials in the reinforced concrete room beneath her kitchen pantry. Emma eventually succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on Martha's spare bed, clutching her backpack filled with her most treasured possessions. Michael used the quiet hours to fully examine Catherine's research journal, the scientific achievements detailed in her elegant handwriting becoming clearer with each page. Her work hadn't just been innovative for the 1950s, much of it remained cutting edge even by contemporary standards. Her understanding of soil microbiology, plant genetics, and ecological systems demonstrated insights some modern researchers were only now beginning to formulate. Most valuable were her detailed records of selective breeding experiments, creating plant varieties specifically adapted to changing climate conditions she had somehow anticipated decades before global warming entered public consciousness. The seed samples preserved in the strongbox represented the physical embodiment of this work genetic material, potentially worth millions in today's agricultural biotechnology market. Dawn brought strategic clarity. Michael needed legal protection for these discoveries before approaching potential commercial partners or investors. Martha's extensive network included a retired patent attorney in the next county who specialized in agricultural innovations. His expertise could help establish preliminary intellectual property claims while they developed a more comprehensive strategy. The attorney's initial assessment exceeded even their optimistic expectations. Catherine's meticulous documentation combined with William's decades of implementation records created a uniquely strong case for intellectual property protection. The specialized crop varieties cultivation methods and integrated pest management approaches represented patentable innovations with significant commercial potential. Most crucially, the attorney identified a legal strategy that might address their immediate financial crisis. With proper documentation, they could potentially secure a bridge loan against the intellectual property rights, providing funds to resolve the foreclosure threat while longer-term commercialization proceeded. Several agricultural investment firms specialize in exactly such arrangements, recognizing the value of verified agricultural innovations. As Michael and Martha developed this strategy, Emma made her own critical discovery. While organizing the photographs they'd found in the wooden box, she noticed something they had overlooked: a partially visible document in the background of one image, showing Catherine in what appeared to be a laboratory setting. When magnified, the paper showed letterhead from Blackwood Agricultural Holdings and contained visible text referencing acquisition of research assets. This seemingly minor detail provided the first tangible connection between Catherine's research and the Blackwood family's subsequent agricultural chemical empire. The timing suggested Richard Blackwood's interest in Catherine may never have been romantic. The arranged marriage might have been primarily a mechanism to gain control of her innovative work, redirecting it toward chemical approaches that offered greater profit potential. The theory gained credibility when Martha's research contacts provided additional historical context. Richard Blackwood III's father had been heavily invested in chemical manufacturing during World War II. With peacetime threatening these profits, agricultural chemicals represented an attractive market conversion if competing sustainable approaches could be suppressed. This historical context cast Catherine's death in an even more troubling light. The official records showed death from pneumonia complications, but the circumstances, a young, otherwise healthy woman collapsing in a public park, had always seemed suspicious. Without modern forensic techniques, determining the truth after 70 years remained impossible, but the circumstantial evidence suggested her death might have been neither natural nor accidental. The connection between the Blackwood family's chemical interests and Victor Harrington's persistent efforts to acquire the Anderson farm grew increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Howard Harrington's early involvement with Blackwood Agrochemical provided the historical link, while Victor's contemporary interests suggested the value of Catherine's innovations remained relevant. Michael's renewed research into Victor Harrington's business activities revealed concerning patterns. His development company had acquired several historical agricultural properties throughout the region, all with similar characteristics. Farms that had maintained productivity when neighboring properties struggled, operations that had employed distinctive, sustainable practices. After acquisition, these properties were rapidly converted to residential developments, their soil effectively buried beneath concrete and decorative landscaping. The apparent strategy became clearer. The Harrington family had been systematically acquiring and essentially destroying farms that might contain evidence of Catherine's agricultural methods. The Anderson farm represented the most direct connection to her work, the property where her innovations had been most thoroughly implemented and documented. Its acquisition would eliminate the last physical evidence of approaches that threatened chemical-dependent agricultural models. This realization transformed Michael's understanding of their situation. The threat wasn't simply losing the family farm to foreclosure or development. It was the potential permanent loss of Catherine's scientific legacy, agricultural innovations that could benefit farmers worldwide in an era of climate instability. Martha's extensive community connections provided unexpected leverage. As former county librarian, she had assisted virtually every local family at some point during her 40-year tenure. This network included the bank manager overseeing the Anderson farm foreclosure proceedings. While unable to cancel the process entirely, he agreed to a 30-day extension based on Martha's personal assurance that alternative financing was being arranged. This reprieve provided critical time to pursue both legal protection for Catherine's intellectual property and potential commercial partnerships. The University Agricultural Extension Office connected Michael with a professor specializing in sustainable agriculture and heirloom crop varieties. Her preliminary assessment of Catherine's seed stock confirmed their scientific significance. Several varieties showed genetic traits for drought and disease resistance that modern breeders had been working to develop. The professor's academic excitement translated to practical support through her contacts at several agricultural investment firms specializing in sustainable innovations. Initial meetings generated serious interest, particularly when Michael demonstrated the documented 70-year success record of Catherine's methods on the Anderson farm. Two firms expressed willingness to provide bridge financing secured by the intellectual property rights, while more comprehensive development partnerships were explored. Victor Harrington's response to these developments came with characteristic calculation. Rather than direct confrontation, he employed more subtle pressure tactics, approaching the bank with a significantly increased offer for the property should the foreclosure proceed, filing complaints with the county about alleged code violations at the Anderson farm, even attempting to challenge the property's agricultural tax status. These maneuvers confirm Martha's theory about Victor's true motivations. A genuine real estate developer interested only in the property's development potential would likely move on to easier acquisitions rather than escalating efforts against strengthening opposition. Victor's persistence suggested the land itself wasn't his primary objective. Eliminating evidence of Catherine's agricultural innovations remained the driving force. The confrontation Michael had been anticipating finally occurred on a rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon. Victor's unannounced arrival at the farmhouse carried none of his usual superficial charm. His demeanor had shifted to open hostility barely contained beneath a veneer of business formality. The final offer he presented included an unusual stipulation: all farm records, family documents, and historical artifacts would be included in the sale with specific mention of any materials related to farming methods. Michael's refusal triggered Victor's calculated revelation: the disclosure that Howard Harrington and Richard Blackwood III had been more than mere business associates. They had been brothers-in-law, their family connections cemented through marriage decades earlier. This relationship explained the persistent Harrington interest in Catherine's research across generations. Whatever had begun in the 1950s remained unfinished family business. Victor's thinly veiled threats extended beyond business maneuvering to personal intimidation. His parting comments about Emma's safety while walking home from the school bus stop carried unmistakable menace. The reference to specific details of her daily routine confirmed they had been under surveillance, the implicit threat shifting their conflict into dangerous territory. Michael's call to the sheriff's office produced more concrete response this time. The deputy who arrived took Victor's threats seriously enough to file a formal report and promise increased patrols. But rural law enforcement resources remained limited, the farm's isolated location making comprehensive protection impossible. Martha's cottage offered temporary refuge while Michael implemented more permanent security measures at the farmhouse. Motion-activated light security cameras reinforced locks on doors and windows. Emma would stay with Martha during school days until the situation resolved, reducing her vulnerability during Michael's necessary absences. These precautions addressed immediate safety concerns, but left the fundamental threat unresolved. Victor's escalating tactics suggested he might eventually attempt direct theft of the research materials, regardless of legal consequences. The intellectual property needed stronger protection than physical security alone could provide. The patent attorney proposed a strategic countermeasure: public disclosure of selected portions of Catherine's research through academic channels. While complete publication would eliminate patent potential, carefully limited disclosure could establish prior art, preventing others from patenting the innovations while maintaining their commercial value for the rightful owners. Michael's great-aunt Claire represented the next critical connection to understanding the full story. At 89, she resided in a comfortable assisted living facility in the neighboring county, her mind still sharp despite physical frailty. As William's younger sister, she had witnessed the events of 1952 and 1953 firsthand, potentially holding answers to questions the documents alone couldn't provide. The elderly woman's initial reaction to Michael's visit contained none of the pleasant nostalgia typical of family reunions. Her expression reflected immediate concern. Her first questions focused on why he was digging into things best left buried. This defensiveness confirmed Martha's theory that the Anderson family had deliberately concealed aspects of William and Catherine's relationship for decades. Claire's reluctance dissolved when Michael explained the immediate threat to the farm and Catherine's research. Her protection of family secrets had never been about denying Catherine's importance, but about honoring William's wishes to shield certain painful truths. With the farm and Catherine's scientific legacy at risk, those considerations no longer applied. The story Claire revealed filled crucial gaps in their understanding. William had indeed received the wooden box after Catherine's death, delivered by a Boston attorney following instructions in her will. But Claire disclosed something the documents hadn't shown William had already known about Catherine's death before the box arrived. More importantly, William had learned something that didn't appear in any official record. Catherine had given birth to a child shortly before her death, a baby immediately placed for adoption through a private Boston agency. The attorney's letter had included this information, along with Catherine's final wish that William not attempt to find the child, allowing it to grow up free from the complications of their unresolved relationship. This revelation hit Michael with physical force. His grandfather had lost not only his first love, but also his firstborn child, a son or daughter, who would now be in their early 70s, who might never have learned their true parentage due to the closed adoption practices of the era. Claire's disclosure continued with another critical detail. William had initially respected Catherine's wishes regarding the child, focusing instead on implementing her agricultural innovations as a form of tribute. But in the late 1950s, after establishing his marriage and starting a family with Michael's grandmother, William had made discreet inquiries about the adoption. These efforts had proven futile against the legally sealed records. But William had learned one crucial fact. The baby, a girl, had been adopted by a family named Reynolds, who relocated from Boston to Seattle shortly afterward. William had documented this information in a separate journal, along with copies of the attorney's letters and adoption agency correspondence. Claire had kept this journal in her personal possession all these years, protecting it even from other family members at William's request. Now she retrieved it from a locked drawer in her bedside table, handing it to Michael with visible relief at finally transferring this responsibility to the next generation. The journal contained something even more valuable than the adoption information. Incomplete paperwork. William had begun preparing to legally challenge the adoption, citing his paternal rights. These documents included a critical detail previously unknown to Michael. Catherine had named her daughter Elizabeth Catherine James, preserving her own surname rather than recording the father's name on the birth certificate. This naming pattern offered a potential path to identifying the adopted child decades later. If the Reynolds family had maintained any portion of the original name, Elizabeth or Catherine might have remained part of her identity. With the additional knowledge of approximate birth date and location, modern digital records might yield results where William's pre-internet searches had failed. Claire's final revelation proved most immediately significant to their current situation. William had attempted one last search for his daughter in the early 1980s, hiring a private investigator who discovered the Reynolds family had maintained the name Elizabeth. The investigator had even located an address and telephone number for Elizabeth Reynolds in the Seattle area. William had written a letter and attempted one telephone call, only to lose courage at the critical moment. The investigator's report indicated Elizabeth Reynolds had become an agricultural scientist specializing in sustainable farming methods remarkably similar to those Catherine had pioneered. The generational connection had expressed itself through shared interests and aptitudes, despite the complete separation. Upon learning this, William had abandoned further contact attempts, believing his daughter had found her path without his intervention. His decision reflected both respect for Catherine's original wishes and concern about disrupting Elizabeth's established life. The investigator's report, with contact information now decades outdated, remained in Claire's possession all these years. This information transformed Michael's understanding of his grandfather and the family legacy. William hadn't merely preserved Catherine's agricultural innovations, he had honored her scientific vision while mourning both her loss and the daughter he never knew. The Anderson farm represented not just land and livelihood, but a living memorial to this complex history. Michael's return to Martha's cottage that evening brought unwelcome discovery. The security cameras he'd installed at the farmhouse had captured multiple intruders, conducting a systematic search of the property, checking the hay wagon, examining the oak tree, even probing walls and floorboards inside the house. Their methodical approach and equipment suggested professional experience rather than opportunistic trespassing. More alarmingly, one figure captured clearly on camera wore the uniform of the sheriff's department, Deputy Collins, the same officer who had taken their trespassing report days earlier. This apparent corruption within local law enforcement dramatically reduced their security options and explained how Victor had remained so well informed about their activities. Emma's frightened reaction to this news crystallized Michael's determination. The farm represented their home and heritage, but no property was worth risking his daughter's safety. The research materials were securely documented, now the intellectual property protection process underway. Perhaps the time had come to consider Victor's offer not as surrender but as strategic repositioning. Martha's vehement opposition to this idea came with unexpected force from the normally measured librarian. Her counterproposal drew on decades of community knowledge. The upcoming town council meeting included an agenda item on historical landmark designations. With proper documentation, the Anderson farm could potentially qualify for emergency historical protection, temporarily blocking any development regardless of ownership. The strategy required comprehensive historical documentation connecting the farm to significant agricultural innovation. Catherine's research journals, William's implementation records, and the physical evidence of the farm's sustained productivity provided compelling support. Martha's reputation within the community would lend additional credibility to the application. The night passed in focused preparation, assembling the required documentation while maintaining vigilant security. Michael's online search for Elizabeth Reynolds yielded promising leads, several agricultural research papers authored by an EC. Reynolds at the University of Washington between the 1970s and early 2000s, focusing on sustainable farming methods, remarkably aligned with Catherine's approaches. The most recent information indicated Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds had retired from the university in 2015, but continued consulting work with sustainable agriculture organizations. Contact information proved elusive through standard searches, but her professional affiliations offered potential communication channels. Michael's carefully worded email to one such organization explained he was researching historical sustainable agriculture methods connected to his family farm, specifically seeking information about Catherine James's work in the early 1950s. The deliberate omission of any reference to biological connection represented an ethical compromise, establishing professional contact before potentially disrupting Elizabeth's understanding of her origins. The response came with unexpected promptness just after midnight, not from the organization but directly from Elizabeth Reynolds herself. Her message expressed surprise and intense interest in his inquiry, explaining that Catherine James was a name she had researched extensively throughout her career, considering her a pioneering but tragically overlooked figure in sustainable agriculture history. Elizabeth's email contained a bombshell revelation. She had been attempting to locate Catherine James's research records for decades, believing they contained innovations that could significantly impact modern, climate-resilient agriculture. Most strikingly, she revealed her own personal connection. She had been adopted as an infant and had reason to believe Catherine James might have been her biological mother. The convergence of professional interest and personal search had driven Elizabeth's career focus on sustainable agriculture, though she had never found definitive proof of her connection to Catherine. Now in her 70s, she had continued the search even after retirement, motivated by both scientific curiosity and personal identity questions. Michael stared at the email for several minutes, the implications overwhelming. The daughter William had never known had independently followed Catherine's scientific path, dedicated her life to the same agricultural principles, and even sought her biological mother's research, all without knowing it physically existed on the Anderson farm, preserved by the father she had never met. His reply required careful consideration. The immediate crisis with Victor Harrington and the farm foreclosure needed resolution before potentially life-changing personal revelations could be addressed. Yet Elizabeth's agricultural expertise and professional credibility could prove invaluable in protecting Catherine's research and the farm itself. Michael's measured response acknowledged the potential connection between their interests without revealing the full personal implications. He explained the discovery of Catherine's research journals and seedstock, the documented implementation of her methods on the Anderson farm for 70 years, and the current threat from development interests seeking to acquire and potentially destroy this scientific legacy. The conversation continued through a rapid exchange of messages, Elizabeth's initial professional interest devolving into urgent concern as she grasped the significance of what Michael had discovered. Her final message that night included a simple statement that resonated with unexpected emotional weight. "I'm booking a flight to your location tomorrow. Some things are too important for email." The revelation of Elizabeth's existence and imminent arrival introduced both hope and complication to their situation. Her professional credentials and expertise could prove decisive in authenticating Catherine's research for intellectual property protection and historical significance designation. Yet the personal implications informing a 73-year-old woman about her biological parentage and the circumstances of her birth carried profound ethical considerations. Martha's practical wisdom provided guidance through this complexity. Focus first on protecting the research and farm through legitimate legal and administrative channels. Allow the personal relationships to develop naturally after securing these tangible assets. Elizabeth's professional interest provided sufficient basis for immediate collaboration without requiring premature disclosure of biological connections. The morning brought new challenges before Elizabeth's anticipated arrival. Victor Harrington had escalated his tactics overnight, filing an emergency petition with the county, claiming the Anderson farm contained hazardous environmental conditions requiring immediate inspection. The transparent attempt to gain legal access to the property demonstrated his growing desperation as their protection strategies advanced. The county environmental office confirmed receiving the complaint, but revealed something Victor hadn't anticipated. Any inspection would require proper notification and scheduling under normal procedures unless imminent public danger could be demonstrated. The office's supervisor, another beneficiary of Martha's library assistance over the years, expressed skepticism about complaints originating from a developer with known interest in acquiring the property. This temporary reprieve provided critical hours to prepare for Elizabeth's arrival and the town council meeting scheduled for that evening. Martha's historical landmark application had been completed overnight, the documentation compelling enough that the council chair had agreed to give it priority consideration despite the late submission. Michael's final preparations included retrieving the original strongbox from the oak tree, ensuring all Catherine's research materials would be safely secured before Elizabeth's examination. The farm appeared quiet during this brief visit, no sign of surveillance or intrusion, but Michael maintained vigilant awareness of his surroundings throughout the task. Emma remained at Martha's cottage, her school having been notified of a family emergency requiring her temporary absence. The practical 10-year-old had adapted to these disruptions with remarkable resilience, converting Martha's dining table into a combination classroom and research center where she organized the historical documents with librarian-approved methodology. The notification of Elizabeth's flight arrival came via text message. She would reach the regional airport by mid-afternoon, renting a barn for the final drive to their location. Her message included a professional biography and photograph to aid recognition, the image showing a distinguished woman in her early 70s with striking blue eyes, reminiscent of William Anderson's distinctive gaze. Michael studied the photograph with intense emotion. Elizabeth Catherine Reynolds had his grandfather's eyes and jawline features that had passed through generations of Andersons. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with the family. She had lived her entire life without knowing her biological father, yet had independently followed the same scientific path as her mother, preserving Catherine's legacy through parallel work, separated by a continent. The airport meeting would bridge 70 years of separation, connecting Catherine and William's legacy through their daughter, who had never known either parent. This reunion represented something beyond the practical concerns of intellectual property and farm preservation. It offered the completion of a circle broken by tragedy decades earlier, the reconnection of a family divided by circumstances rather than choice. As Michael prepared to leave for the airport, Emma's perspective cut through the emotional complexity with characteristic directness. If Elizabeth is Grandpa William's daughter, that makes her your dad's aunt, which makes her my great-great-aunt. We're finding family, not just old papers. The observation crystallized the human dimension of their discovery. Beyond the agricultural innovations, beyond the legal strategies and historical designations, they were restoring connections severed by time and tragedy. The Anderson farm wasn't merely property. It was the physical embodiment of a legacy that extended through generations, connecting people who had never met, yet shared profound bonds of blood and vision. Martha's final advice before Michael's departure for the airport carried both practical wisdom and emotional insight. Remember that Elizabeth has lived an entire life without this knowledge. Her identity is built on different foundations. Whatever relationship develops must honor who she has become, not just who her parents were. The drive to the airport provided necessary solitude to prepare for this momentous meeting. Michael rehearsed various approaches, considering how to balance the immediate practical crisis with the profound personal revelations. Elizabeth's professional interest in Catherine's research offered natural common ground, allowing their connection to develop organically before addressing biological relationships. The terminal's arrival area hummed with typical airport energy, emotional reunions, business travelers striding purposefully toward rental counters, families corralling children and luggage with orchestrated chaos. Michael scanned the emerging passengers, the photograph of Elizabeth fixed in his mind. When she appeared, the recognition was immediate and mutual. Elizabeth Reynolds carried herself with the confident posture of an accomplished academic, her silver hair styled in a practical bob, her clothing suggesting practical elegance rather than fashion. But it was her eyes that confirmed her identity beyond any documentation, William Anderson's distinctive blue gaze somehow containing the same thoughtful assessment Michael remembered from his grandfather. Elizabeth spotted him simultaneously, her expression registering recognition, though they had never exchanged photographs. Something in his stance or features must have triggered familiarity. The Anderson characteristics inadvertently revealing our connections neither had yet acknowledged. She moved toward him with direct purpose, extending her hand with professional courtesy that couldn't quite mask the emotional undertones of the moment. Their introduction remained deliberately focused on the research that had brought her across the country, Catherine James's agricultural innovations, the 70-year implementation on the Anderson farm, the threat from development interests. Elizabeth's questions demonstrated sophisticated scientific understanding, each inquiry revealing how closely her life's work had paralleled her unknown mother's research. The rental car journey from airport to Martha's cottage provided opportunity to gauge Elizabeth's perspective before revealing the full personal implications of their discovery. Her conversation revealed a lifetime dedicated to the same agricultural principles Catherine had pioneered: sustainable methods, biological pest management, drought-resistant crop development. Without knowing her biological connection, Elizabeth had carried forward her mother's scientific vision across decades. The coincidence seemed too profound for random chance. Some combination of genetic predisposition and cosmic synchronicity had guided Catherine's daughter to complete work begun before her birth. The scientific mind might dismiss such patterns as confirmation bias, yet the evidence of parallel development across generations separated by adoption and geography suggested something beyond statistical probability. Martha's cottage appeared ahead, its warm lights glowing against the gathering dusk. Inside waited the physical evidence, connecting Elizabeth to parents she had never known. Catherine's research journals, William's implementation records, photographs capturing their brief time together before tragedy separated them forever. Also waiting was Emma, the granddaughter of William's son, with his second wife, the living embodiment of the family Elizabeth had never known existed. As Michael parked beside the cottage, Elizabeth's expression shifted from professional interest to something more personal. Perhaps the rural setting had triggered recognition, or some subconscious awareness of biological connection had finally surfaced. Whatever the cause, her voice carried emotional weight beyond academic curiosity when she spoke. "I've spent my entire career searching for Catherine James's work, believing it held answers I needed. I never imagined I might find it like this, preserved on a family farm I never knew existed." The moment had arrived sooner than Michael had anticipated. Elizabeth's intuitive connection to their situation suggested she had already begun assembling pieces of a puzzle she had pursued throughout her adult life. The full truth waited just inside, documented in photographs, letters, and adoption records that would transform her understanding of her origins and identity. Michael paused at the cottage door, finding words that acknowledged both the scientific mission and the human journey they were undertaking together. What you'll find inside goes beyond agricultural research. It's about legacy, both scientific and personal. Catherine James wasn't just a brilliant researcher whose work my grandfather implemented. Their story is far more intertwined than that, and it directly connects to who you are. Elizabeth's steady gaze held his, the resemblance to William Anderson, unmistakable in that moment of recognition. Her response came with quiet certainty that suggested she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "I've always known I was searching for more than just scientific papers. Lead the way, I'm ready to meet my past." Martha's cottage transformed into something sacred the moment Elizabeth Reynolds crossed its threshold, a sanctuary where past and present converged after 70 years of separation. The retired librarian had arranged Catherine's research materials with museum-quality precision across the dining table, chronologically ordered to tell the story that connected everyone in the room. Emma stood slightly behind Martha, her eyes wide with the significance of the moment. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, her usual casual clothes replaced by her special occasion outfit, understanding instinctively that this was a historical moment for her family. Elizabeth moved toward the displayed materials with the reverence of someone approaching an altar. Her hands, bearing the distinctive knuckles and long fingers that had characterized William Anderson's, hovered above Catherine's research journal, without touching it, as if absorbing its energy through proximity alone. When she finally lifted the journal, her professional demeanor cracked slightly. Recognition flashed across her features, followed by something deeper. A primal connection to handwriting she had never consciously seen, but somehow knew on a cellular level. The scientific part of Elizabeth would dismiss such notions as sentimental projection, but the woman who had spent decades searching for her origins couldn't deny the visceral response. The photographs affected her most profoundly. Elizabeth lifted the image of Catherine and William at the county fair, studying her biological mother's face with intense concentration. The resemblance between them was subtle but unmistakable, the same high cheekbones, the same thoughtful set to their mouths. Though separated by adoption and death, nature had ensured Catherine lived on in her daughter's features. Emma's observation cut through the emotional weight of the moment. She pointed to the photograph, then to Elizabeth, then back again. Sometimes people recognize themselves in the mirror, the same way like they're meeting a stranger who isn't really a stranger. Elizabeth's scientific mind had guided her life's work, yet science offered no explanation for the feeling washing through her as she examined these artifacts of her origins. The agricultural theories documented in Catherine's journals paralleled Elizabeth's own research with unsettling precision approaches she had developed independently over decades, believing herself their originator, now revealed as inheritance rather than innovation. Martha provided the context Elizabeth needed, explaining how they had discovered the wooden box in the hay wagon, followed the clues to the oak tree's hidden compartment, and gradually pieced together the connection between Catherine James William Anderson and the child they had conceived during that pivotal summer of 1952. Michael watched Elizabeth's expression shift between professional assessment and personal revelation as she examined each document. The scientist in her evaluated Catherine's research with expert precision, noting its remarkable foresight and technical accuracy. The daughter in her absorbed details of her biological parents with hungry intensity, learning who they had been, how they had loved, why they had separated. The revelation of her birth circumstances unfolded through William's journal entries and the attorney's correspondence. Elizabeth learned how Catherine had discovered her pregnancy after returning to Boston, how she had broken her engagement to Richard Blackwood III despite family pressure, how she had intended to return to William, but died before that reunion could occur. Most poignantly, Elizabeth discovered William had known about her existence, had attempted to find her despite Catherine's wishes that she grow up free from complications. The journal entries detailing his search, his discovery of her adoption by the Reynolds family, and his ultimate decision not to disrupt her established life, revealed a father she had never known yet, who had influenced her existence in absentia. When Elizabeth finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades spent searching for pieces of a puzzle she hadn't fully understood until this moment. The discoveries before her weren't merely academic validation of her life's work, they were the missing foundation of her identity, the origins she had sensed but never confirmed. The reality that she had independently devoted her career to the same agricultural principles her biological mother had pioneered seemed beyond coincidental. Through some combination of genetics and cosmic synchronicity, Elizabeth had carried forward Catherine's vision, despite their separation, developing parallel innovations across the decades, as if guided by some inherited scientific intuition. More jarring was the connection to William Anderson, the father whose existence she had never suspected, whose decision to implement Catherine's agricultural methods had preserved not just her mother's scientific legacy, but created the living laboratory of the Anderson farm. The same farm now threatened by the descendant of the man who may have been responsible for her mother's untimely death. The historical evidence Martha had assembled suggested a disturbing possibility that Catherine's pneumonia had been neither natural nor accidental. The timing of her collapse in Boston Common shortly after breaking her engagement, combined with the Blackwood family's subsequent agricultural chemical empire, built on principles opposing her sustainable methods, pointed toward deliberate suppression of both the woman and her research. This historical injustice connected directly to their present crisis through Victor Harrington's relentless pursuit of the Anderson farm. His father Howard's business partnership with Richard Blackwood III now appeared more strategic than coincidental, a multi-generational effort to control and suppress Catherine's agricultural innovations that had continued across 7 decades. Elizabeth's professional credentials and scientific reputation offered unexpected leverage against these forces. As Professor Emerita from the University of Washington's Agricultural Sciences Department, her authentication of Catherine's research carried authoritative weight that neither Michael nor Martha could provide. Her assessment of the seed varieties preserved in the strongbox confirmed their significant scientific and commercial value. The town council meeting scheduled for that evening represented their first opportunity to deploy this new advantage. Elizabeth's willingness to testify regarding the historical and scientific significance of the Anderson farm dramatically strengthened Martha's historical landmark application. Victor Harrington would face not merely local preservationists, but internationally recognized agricultural expertise. The strategy session that followed focused on immediate protection mechanisms. Elizabeth's university connections provided access to secure laboratory facilities where Catherine's seed varieties could be properly preserved and documented. Her professional network included agricultural patent attorneys specializing in historical innovations who could accelerate the intellectual property protection process. Most critically, Elizabeth's Research Foundation maintained relationships with sustainable agriculture investment groups specifically interested in drought-resistant crop varieties like those Catherine had developed. These connections offered potential financial partnerships that could resolve the foreclosure threat while preserving the farm's research function. The parallel paths of mother and daughter converged across time, Catherine's innovations preserved through William's faithful implementation, now validated and extended through the daughter who had never known either parent. The scientific legacy had survived despite deliberate suppression transmitted through some combination of genetics, coincidence, and persistence that defied rational explanation. Emma observed this connection with characteristic directness. It's like the farm was waiting for Elizabeth to come home and finish what Catherine started. Some things are too important to stay buried forever. This perspective reframed their struggle beyond personal property or family heritage. The Anderson farm represented the physical embodiment of agricultural principles that might help address contemporary climate challenges, sustainable methods Catherine had envisioned. Decades before global warming entered public consciousness, approaches Elizabeth had independently validated through modern scientific methodology. The council meeting that evening unfolded with unexpected intensity. The municipal building's modest chambers filled beyond capacity, word having spread throughout the community about the historical landmark application. Martha's decades of community service had generated substantial goodwill, bringing supporters who might otherwise have remained uninvolved. Victor Harrington arrived with calculated precision 15 minutes before the scheduled start, accompanied by two attorneys and an architectural consultant. His confident demeanor suggested he anticipated routine approval of his development plans, despite the last-minute preservation attempt. The appearance of Elizabeth Reynolds alongside Michael and Martha visibly disrupted this confidence, though he maintained his practiced corporate smile. Martha's presentation established the historical significance of the Anderson farm beyond sentimental value. Her meticulous documentation traced 4 generations of agricultural innovation, emphasizing William Anderson's implementation of sustainable farming methods decades before such approaches gained mainstream recognition. The continuous operation and productivity of the farm through climate challenges that devastated neighboring properties demonstrated its unique significance. Michael provided the personal dimension connecting the farm's agricultural importance to family legacy and community heritage. His testimony emphasized not just the Anderson family's multi-generational stewardship, but the broader implications of preserving functioning examples of sustainable agriculture in an era of increasing climate instability. Elizabeth's testimony transformed the proceedings from routine municipal business to something approaching academic conference. Her professional credentials commanded immediate respect, her scientific explanation of Catherine James's agricultural innovations providing authoritative context that visibly impressed council members. Her assessment of the farm's value as a living laboratory for sustainable methods demonstrated its significance beyond local heritage concerns. The revelation of Elizabeth's biological connection to both Catherine James and William Anderson added emotional weight to her scientific testimony. The daughter, separated from both parents by tragedy, had independently followed her mother's scientific path, eventually reconnecting with her origins through the very innovations that defined her career. This personal narrative elevated the farm's significance beyond technical agriculture into profound human interest. Victor Harrington's counter-argument focused on economic pragmatism, tax revenue projections, job creation, estimates, infrastructure improvements his development would provide. His presentation reflected polished corporate precision, each point supported by professional analysis from his consulting team. Yet his usually confident delivery contained subtle indicators of concern, slight hesitations, occasional glances toward Elizabeth, tension in his otherwise practiced smile. The council's deliberation revealed unexpected depth of engagement with the competing perspectives. Questions directed to Elizabeth demonstrated genuine interest in the scientific significance of Catherine's agricultural methods. Inquiries to Michael explored potential alternatives to preserve the farm's research function while addressing economic development needs. Victor faced increasingly pointed examination regarding his specific development plans and whether they could accommodate partial preservation. The council chair's announcement cut through these discussions with administrative practicality. Formal decision would require additional review given the significant new information presented. The historical landmark application would receive expedited consideration with temporary protected status granted during the review period. This procedural mechanism effectively blocked any development activity for at least 60 days, well beyond the extended foreclosure deadline. Victor's reaction revealed more than his careful words. The slight flush across his cheekbones, the tightening of his jaw, the deliberate control of his breathing, all betrayed frustration beneath his congratulatory remarks to the council on their thorough process. His departure from the chambers carried none of his usual casual confidence, his stride purposeful, his attention focused forward rather than engaging with the community members who typically received his practiced charm. The temporary reprieve provided critical time to implement more permanent protections. Elizabeth's university connections offered immediate practical support. The Agricultural Extension Service would document Catherine's seed varieties and farming methods as part of an officially sanctioned research project providing both academic validation and legal standing for their preservation. Financial partnerships developed with surprising speed once Elizabeth activated her professional network. 3 sustainable agriculture investment groups expressed serious interest in Catherine's innovations, particularly the drought-resistant crop varieties documented in her research. 2 firms submitted preliminary partnership proposals that would resolve the foreclosure threat while maintaining the farm's research function under Anderson Family Management. Most significantly, the University of Washington's Agricultural Sciences Department, where Elizabeth had spent her career, proposed establishing a research satellite facility on a portion of the Anderson farm, creating an east-west collaboration focused on climate-resilient farming methods. This institutional partnership offered both financial stability and academic protection against development pressure. These positive developments accelerated alongside concerning indicators of Victor's continued determination. Security cameras captured nighttime surveillance of the farm perimeter by unmarked vehicles. Martha received additional inquiries from supposed research firms seeking information about historical agricultural practices in the county. Most troublingly, Emma reported a stranger photographing her school playground from a parked car, the same model and color as vehicles previously observed monitoring the farm. These escalations necessitated both legal and physical countermeasures. Michael filed formal harassment complaints with law enforcement agencies beyond the compromised local sheriff's department. Martha's extensive network arranged discreet security services through a veterans organization whose members provided volunteer monitoring of both the farm and Emma's school. Elizabeth's university position generated official institutional concern about potential interference with academic research, adding another layer of scrutiny to Victor's activities. The crucial breakthrough emerged from Elizabeth's professional examination of Catherine's complete research materials. The comprehensive journals recovered from the oak tree contained more than agricultural innovations. They included detailed observations of Catherine's interactions with Richard Blackwood III and his father in the weeks before her return to Boston. These notes documented their unusual interest in her research, particularly their focused questions about drought-resistant crop varieties. Most significantly, Catherine had recorded specific concerns about Richard Blackwood Sr.'s reaction when she mentioned her sustainable pest management approaches that eliminated the need for chemical applications. His apparent anger in subsequent private conversation with his son had triggered Catherine's first doubts about the arranged marriage, ultimately leading to her decision to break the engagement. These contemporaneous records provided historical context for the Blackwood family's subsequent agricultural chemical empire. What had begun as wartime chemical manufacturing had transitioned to agricultural applications precisely when Catherine's sustainable alternatives might have limited this market. The timing suggested more than coincidental business evolution. It indicated deliberate suppression of competing approaches that threatened potential profits. Elizabeth's research colleagues identified additional connections through historical corporate records. Blackwood Agrochemicals' early patent applications covered chemical solutions for the exact agricultural challenges Catherine's sustainable methods had addressed. Several early company documents referenced disproving alternative approaches with specific language that paralleled Catherine's research terminology, suggesting direct knowledge of her work. The most damning evidence emerged from hospital records Elizabeth's medical school colleagues helped locate. Catherine's admission documentation noted unusual symptoms inconsistent with typical pneumonia progression, symptoms more aligned with certain chemical exposures than bacterial or viral infection. While insufficient for definitive conclusions after 70 years, these records supported the troubling possibility that her death resulted from deliberate action rather than natural illness. The historical connection between the Blackwood chemical interests and the Harrington family provided context for Victor's persistent pursuit of the Anderson farm. His father Howard's early investment in Blackwood Agrochemical had established the family fortune, creating financial motivation to eliminate evidence that might undermine the chemical-dependent agricultural model they had promoted for decades. This historical perspective transformed their understanding of their current conflict. Victor wasn't merely seeking profitable real estate development, he was continuing a multi-generational effort to control agricultural approaches that had begun with Catherine's death and continued through systematic acquisition of farms implementing her methods. The Anderson property represented the most direct connection to her work, the physical embodiment of alternatives to chemical-dependent farming. Elizabeth's discovery of this pattern brought personal as well as professional significance. The parents she had never known had been separated not merely by circumstance, but by deliberate suppression of Catherine's scientific contributions. Her lifetime of parallel research represented unwitting continuation of her mother's work, independent validation of approaches that powerful interests had attempted to eliminate decades earlier. The town council's formal decision arrived with unexpected thoroughness. The Anderson farm received not just historical landmark designation, but special agricultural research site status, providing multiple layers of protection against development. The council's unanimous vote reflected both Martha's effective advocacy and the compelling combination of historical significance and contemporary research value Elizabeth had established. Victor's response emerged through legal rather than personal channels. His attorneys filed challenges to the landmark designation based on procedural technicalities, while simultaneously pursuing expedited foreclosure through banking connections despite the previously granted extension. These maneuvers reflected desperation rather than confidence, rearguard actions against the strengthening protection of the farm and Catherine's research. The investment partnership Elizabeth had arranged with sustainable agriculture firms provided the financial resolution that neutralized Victor's remaining leverage. The formal agreement established a research collaborative that resolved the mortgage default while maintaining Anderson family ownership and management. Michael would continue operating the working portions of the farm, while designated research areas would advance Catherine's innovative approaches under university oversight. Victor's final confrontation came not through legal channels but through unexpected personal appearance at the farmhouse. His arrival without attorneys or corporate entourage suggested recognition that institutional strategies had failed. The composed business facade had deteriorated, revealing the desperation beneath his previous confidence. His proposal combined threat and opportunity in calculated measure. He would withdraw all legal challenges and banking pressure in exchange for complete access to Catherine's research materials and seed varieties. The Anderson family could keep their farm, retain landmark status, even maintain university research partnerships provided he received exclusive rights to Catherine's original work. This offer revealed Victor's true objective more clearly than any previous action. The farm itself had been secondary. Catherine's agricultural innovations represented the primary target all along. The potential value of drought-resistant, chemical-free crop varieties in an era of climate change and growing organic market demand explained the persistent pursuit across decades and generations. Michael's refusal triggered Victor's final revelation, the disclosure that his connection to this conflict extended beyond business interests to personal heritage. Howard Harrington had not merely been Richard Blackwood's business partner, but his wife's brother. Victor was Richard Blackwood III's nephew, his interest in Catherine's research representing family business, extending it across 3 generations. This connection explained the persistent Harrington involvement in suppressing Catherine's agricultural methods. What had begun with her death in 1953 had continued through systematic corporate acquisition and development of properties implementing her approaches. The Anderson farm represented the last direct link to innovations that threatened the chemical-dependent agricultural model that had generated decades of family wealth. Victor's departure carried the weight of defeat despite his attempt at dignified withdrawal. The multi-generational effort to control Catherine's innovations had finally encountered the one obstacle it couldn't overcome: the daughter, who had independently validated and extended her mother's work, providing scientific credibility no corporate interest could easily dismiss. Elizabeth's response to these revelations reflected both professional assessment and personal reckoning. The scientific validation of her mother's work represented career vindication, confirmation that her independent research had followed legitimate principles rather than academic fashions. The personal implications cut deeper, understanding that her adoption and separation from her biological father had resulted from deliberate suppression of her mother's scientific contributions. The formal research partnership established between the Anderson farm and Elizabeth's university connections created infrastructure to preserve Catherine's legacy beyond individual lifetimes. The sustainable agriculture methods would continue development through institutional support, while the seed varieties she had developed would undergo proper documentation and protection against corporate appropriation. Emma's perspective added emotional clarity that adult complications sometimes obscured. The 10-year-old observed that Catherine's ideas were like seeds themselves. They'd been waiting in the dark for the right time to grow. Now they had Elizabeth to help them become what they were supposed to be all along. This generational continuity extended beyond scientific principles to human connections. Elizabeth's biological relationship to the Anderson family established kinship severed by adoption and time. Though Elizabeth would maintain her Seattle residence and university affiliations, regular visits to the farm would become part of her routine, bridging the geographical separation between her established life and newly discovered origins. The spring planting season brought physical manifestation of this reconnection. Elizabeth returned to the Anderson farm with university colleagues to establish research plots using Catherine's preserved seed varieties. These experimental fields would document the performance of her mother's drought-resistant crops under contemporary climate conditions, providing scientific validation of innovations developed 70 years earlier. Michael incorporated these experimental approaches into the farm's commercial operations, implementing Catherine's integrated pest management and soil conservation techniques across additional acreage. The continued productivity of these methods after 7 decades provided living testimony to their sustainability, the practical demonstration more compelling than theoretical arguments against chemical-dependent alternatives. Emma's involvement in this agricultural renaissance reflected inheritance beyond genetics. Her careful attention to the experimental plots, her detailed observations recorded in journals reminiscent of Catherine's original documentation, suggested scientific aptitude, connecting 3 generations of women, separated by time yet united through shared intellectual curiosity. Elizabeth recognized her biological mother's methodical approach in the granddaughter of William's son by another marriage, connections transcending conventional family boundaries. The university partnership generated unexpected academic recognition of Catherine's historical contributions. Elizabeth's presentation at the National Sustainable Agriculture Conference introduced Catherine James as an overlooked pioneer whose work anticipated contemporary approaches by decades. The subsequent journal publication formally established Catherine's place in agricultural science history, crediting innovations previously attributed to later researchers. This academic rehabilitation extended beyond scientific acknowledgement to personal vindication. The tragic circumstances of Catherine's death and the suppression of her research received proper historical context through Elizabeth's careful documentation of the Blackwood family's subsequent agricultural chemical empire. While insufficient for legal action, after 70 years, this record ensured the historical narrative would reflect the deliberate suppression of sustainable alternatives for corporate profit. Victor Harrington's corporate trajectory reflected these changing narratives. His development company faced increased scrutiny regarding previous acquisitions of historically significant agricultural properties. Shareholder concerns about environmental stewardship and sustainable practices forced policy revisions inconsistent with his traditional business model. His resignation as CEO followed predictable corporate language, about pursuing other opportunities while implicitly acknowledging defeat in the Anderson Farm conflict. The Blackwood agricultural chemical interests faced similar pressures through different channels. Elizabeth's academic rehabilitation of Catherine James's sustainable approaches generated renewed scientific examination of chemical alternatives. Market shifts toward organic and sustainable products accelerated as climate concerns intensified. The corporate empire built on suppressing Catherine's innovations began contracting through the very market forces it had sought to control for decades. Michael's perspective on these developments balanced practical satisfaction with philosophical reflection. The farm's financial security had been established through the research partnerships Elizabeth arranged. Emma's future educational opportunities were assured through scholarship funds connected to the sustainable agriculture programs. The Anderson family legacy would continue through both working agricultural production and scientific research advancement. Yet the resolution extended beyond practical considerations to something approaching cosmic justice. Catherine's scientific vision, suppressed through her untimely death, had survived through William's faithful implementation, eventually reconnecting with the daughter who had unknowingly carried forward its core principles throughout her career. The corporate interests that had attempted to eliminate these sustainable approaches faced market evolution, increasingly favoring the very methods they had suppressed. The oak tree that had preserved Catherine's complete research for 70 years continued its silent witness to these developments. Michael and Elizabeth established a small memorial beneath its spreading branches, a simple stone marker acknowledging Catherine James as agricultural innovator, environmental pioneer, beloved mother. The private ceremony included only the immediate family, honoring connections that transcended conventional relationships. Elizabeth's reconnection with her biological origins transformed her understanding of her life's work. What she had perceived as independent scientific development revealed itself as inheritance, operating through channels beyond conscious awareness. The parallel paths of mother and daughter, separated by tragedy, yet ultimately converged through shared scientific vision, suggested connections operating beyond rational explanation. The human dimensions of this scientific legacy found expression through the developing relationship between Elizabeth and the Anderson family. Though separated by geography and decades of independent lives, the biological connection established through Catherine and William created bonds that transcended conventional family structures. Elizabeth's regular visits to the farm evolved from professional research oversight to genuine kinship, her relationship with Emma developing particular depth through shared scientific curiosity. Michael observed this emerging connection with complex emotion. Elizabeth represented both the half-sister his father had never known existed and the aunt Emma had gained through historical discovery. The family narrative had expanded beyond traditional boundaries, incorporating connections severed by tragedy, yet resilient enough to reestablish across generations. The autumn harvest brought physical manifestation of Catherine's agricultural legacy. The experimental plots planted with her preserved seed varieties demonstrated remarkable productivity, despite drought conditions that stressed conventional crops. The university research team documented performance metrics exceeding modern commercial varieties in key resilience indicators, confirming the scientific value of innovations developed 70 years earlier. This validation extended beyond academic interest to practical application. Several sustainable agriculture firms expressed interest in commercially developing Catherine's seed varieties with profit-sharing arrangements that would benefit both the Anderson Farm and Elizabeth's Research Foundation. The genetic material Catherine had preserved represented valuable intellectual property with particular relevance in an era of climate uncertainty. The hay wagon that had preserved the wooden box through decades of neglect underwent restoration through Michael's carpentry skills. The weathered wood received careful rehabilitation rather than replacement, preserving the authentic character while ensuring structural integrity. The secret compartment remained functional, though now empty, its contents secured in climate-controlled university archives while maintaining Anderson family ownership. This physical restoration paralleled the broader rehabilitation of Catherine's scientific legacy. Elizabeth's academic publications established proper historical credit for innovations previously attributed to later researchers. The university partnership created institutional infrastructure to continue development of sustainable approaches Catherine had pioneered. The commercial interest in her seed varieties ensured her work would achieve practical implementation beyond the Anderson farm. Emma's perspective on these developments maintained the clarity adults sometimes lost in complications. The events of the past year had transformed her understanding from simple family farm to living scientific legacy. Her casual observation during the harvest captured this evolution. When Catherine hid her research in the tree and wagon, she wasn't just hiding it from bad people. She was saving it for the right time when Elizabeth and we would be ready to finish what she started. This intergenerational perspective reframed their experience beyond immediate concerns of property preservation or family heritage. Catherine's innovations, William's faithful implementation, Michael's discovery, and Elizabeth's validation represented a scientific legacy transmitted across 3 generations despite deliberate suppression. The Anderson farm had become the physical nexus where these connections converged, the living embodiment of principles that had survived through channels beyond rational explanation. The formal establishment of the Catherine James Agricultural Research Center institutionalized this legacy beyond individual lifetimes. The university partnership provided academic infrastructure, while the sustainable agriculture investment partnerships ensured financial stability. The physical facilities developed on designated portions of the Anderson farm would advance Catherine's scientific vision through contemporary research methods. Elizabeth's regular participation in this research center bridged her established academic career with her newly discovered biological heritage. Though maintaining her primary residence in Seattle, she established a small cottage on the Anderson property for extended research visits. This geographical connection paralleled the emotional bonds developing between Elizabeth and the family she had discovered 70 years after her birth. Michael's perspective on these developments balanced practical satisfaction with philosophical wonder. The farm that 4 generations of Andersons had worked remained in family hands, its productivity assured through both traditional operations and innovative research partnerships. Emma's future included opportunities neither he nor his ancestors could have imagined. Her natural scientific curiosity nurtured through connection with Elizabeth and the university programs. Yet beyond these practical outcomes, Michael recognized something approaching cosmic symmetry in their experience. Catherine's death had prevented her return to William and their child, yet her research had survived through his faithful implementation. Elizabeth had independently developed parallel approaches without knowing her biological origins, eventually reconnecting with her parents' legacy through the very innovations they had created together. The most profound resolution emerged through the relationship developing between Elizabeth and Emma. Despite lacking conventional grandmother-granddaughter biological connection, their bond transcended traditional family structures through shared intellectual curiosity and scientific aptitude. Elizabeth recognized Catherine's methodical thinking in Emma's approach to experimental plots, while Emma absorbed agricultural knowledge connecting her directly to innovations developed before her grandmother's birth. This connection, spanning 3 generations of women operating through channels beyond conventional family transmission, suggested something profound about the resilience of human legacy. Catherine's scientific vision had survived not merely through physical records, but through some combination of genetics, cosmic synchronicity, and persistent truth that defied rational explanation. The oak tree that had preserved Catherine's research through decades of seasons continued its silent witness to these developments. New initials had joined those carved 70 years earlier. Michael and Emma had added their marks during the memorial ceremony, connecting present to past through living wood that would continue growing long after current generations passed. The tree stood as both literal and metaphorical embodiment of legacy roots, drawing sustenance from the same soil. Catherine had analyzed branches extending toward futures she had somehow anticipated. The spring following Victor's defeat brought renewal beyond seasonal expectation. The experimental fields planted with Catherine's preserved seed varieties demonstrated vigorous growth despite challenging conditions, their productivity confirming the validity of innovations developed decades before climate resilience entered agricultural consciousness. The university research team documented performance metrics that attracted attention beyond academic circles to commercial agricultural interests. Michael observed these developments with satisfaction transcending personal victory. The Anderson farm had evolved from simple family property to living laboratory for sustainable approaches, increasingly relevant in an era of environmental uncertainty. The principles Catherine and William had implemented 70 years earlier now represented cutting-edge responses to contemporary challenges, their foresight vindicated through practical demonstration. Elizabeth's perspective balanced professional validation with personal reconciliation. Her lifelong research path had unknowingly paralleled her biological mother's work, their shared scientific vision operating through channels beyond conscious awareness. The parents she had never known had influenced her development through some combination of genetics and cosmic connection that scientific rationality couldn't fully explain. Emma's straightforward observation during spring planting captured the essence of their intergenerational experience. We're not just growing crops, we're growing Catherine's ideas that waited all this time to be found. Sometimes the most important seeds stay hidden until exactly when they're needed most.